Good afternoon. The first part I wanted to start off with was forest products, because I was at one point in my life involved with that. When I was a teenager, 14 years old, I was sent to this farm to keep me out of trouble. And the farmer there had a mixed farm and also a cedar bush. So in the summers, we would go into the cedar bush and we would cut out posts and poles, telephone poles. He sold every telephone pole. He was one of the only people on that line that did sell his telephone poles, and it was partly because he had an advantage. His father worked for Bell. Because he worked for Bell, he knew the people who bought the poles. And when he talked to the people who bought the poles, he knew exactly what the specifications were, so that when he delivered his poles, they bought every one. So this is one part of market knowledge, of learning how to market your stuff, is if you have an in, or you know people who have an in, follow it up and try to find out exactly what they want to buy, because in many cases they have very, very strict specifications. I was, at one point, I was in London. I'd gone there for about 3 weeks and ended up spending about 5 years there. At one point, I needed to get a job, so I went to the local employment office and found reference to a job selling Canadian and other wood products. It was a store called the Door Store in the Louvre Centre. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I knew something about the wood, so maybe I could get a job there. So I went there, got interviewed, left, and then a half an hour later they called me and they said, "We want me back. They want me to start work." So I started work in this place. It was in central London, and they sold Canadian wood products. They sold were panels, louvered panels, solid ones, not like these, but and cedar doors, cedar doors and windows, solid cedar doors, panels, and all the panels and louvered doors were made of pine. And they also sold spruce louvered panels from Yugoslavia, and I think it was called ramen mahogany from Taiwan. And what was really interesting for this in terms of this meeting is I was basically, in a way, a customer, somebody who was buying the stuff, because my job was to look at all these different wood products and catalog them, and then my job was to go all around England and Scotland and Wales. I'd go to Bristol and I'd meet with builders merchants and select in each city one that would act as our sort of a franchise. Now, technically, it wasn't like the franchise of today where you basically get looted by the big company that you're working for. What this arrangement was is that they took on to sell your range of wood products, then they would have the rights for that city or part of that city. And it didn't change after that. And all they had to do is a minimum amount of advertising, and then we would promote the fact that if you were from Bristol or Edinburgh or whatever, you could get these products. The important thing about the products that we got from Canada, they came from a company in Quebec called, I think it was Boulanger Brothers. And the quality of them was just unsurpassed. Every container we got in, you'd go through all the stock. There was never any warp, there was never any stains, there was never any breakage. So you could count on that stuff coming in and then shipping it off to whatever, any city that needed it, and you knew you weren't going to have returns. The stuff coming from Yugoslavia, it was pretty well made, but there was problems with warpage. I don't know why. I guess the climate was sufficiently different from Yugoslavia, where they were made, to Britain, which is in many places quite damp. And you had to actually advise people, no, you don't want to put that one in your laundry room, because it might start to twist. And the problem with the stuff we got from Taiwan was that it sometimes was messed up with staining and breakage and warping, but you never had somebody you could talk to. We never I don't ever remember in the 3 or 4 years I worked there ever talking to an agent from that company. Whereas the people from Yugoslavia, they'd send 2 or 3 people up, and we'd sit around, they'd take us out to lunch, and we'd sit around and talk about different wood products and their families and stuff like this. They were very, very gregarious. They made a big impact, even though it wasn't the best product. They made a big impact in terms of them wanting to know what any of the problems were, and they'd sort them out. The stuff that came from Canada, I think in the 4 years we had 1 visit. And basically, they would keep in touch, but there was not much need. We got the materials in, we sent them out, we sold them, we made money, that was it. And the last one I wanted to tell you about is some work I did in the late 80s. I was hired by the Canadian Paper Workers Union to work on a project throughout Northern Ontario. It was called the Technology Adjustment Research Program. And the project I worked on was to analyze the state of investment in the different mills, stud mills, paper mills, right throughout the area where their members were the union. And there was one particular paper company that I heard about in the Sioux, and they had different problems. The biggest problem they had was that they would get all this inventory, mill and all the storage would fill up, and then they'd realize they had no orders. So they'd pack somebody into a car, give him a pile of samples, and he'd tootle off down into the States, go around to about 10 or 15 different cities, and come back. The order books were full, and then they would ship all the stuff out, then they'd start doing it again, right? So I thought, that mill, I'm not sure, it's like, the product is excellent, but the management isn't really on top of sales, so it's hard to tell whether this mill is going to be around in 5 or 10 years. Now, the union was specifically interested in how long these mills were going to go. What was the level of investment? Where are the companies putting in new dryers? Were they putting in new facilities, new storage? Were they doing training? Because if they weren't, then the union had a good idea that that mill was not long for this world. They also assessed the amount of fiber that was coming in, the distance it had to travel to that mill, to decide whether, it was going to be economical again in the long run. I was in and of course, the 80s, the 90s, and the last 10 years, we've seen just a complete decimation of so many different mills all across, not just Northern Ontario, but Quebec and out here. I was in the Sioux about 3 weeks ago, and I was having dinner with somebody from the Ontario Forestry Institute there. And I said, so what happened to that mill? And he said, oh, it's still going. I said, what do you mean it's still going? He says, yeah, it's the only one. It's still going. And the only thing I can conclude from this is the quality of the products they make. And it's the same with the cedar poles. It's the same with the wood products, the pine and cedar we got in Quebec. And it's the same with these fine papers. They were quality products. And I think when you look at what you're trying to sell anywhere, you've got to start with quality, because that's what people want. Because if you're a buyer, the hassle of returning stuff, the hassle of explaining to people that you've sold to why there's a problem with it, is just not worth it. You want something that you don't have to give an excuse for. You want to be proud of what you're selling and not hear about it again. Now, 14 years ago, I started into, I guess, non-timber forest products. It was interesting because I've been sort of interested and involved with food all my life, but I didn't really know an awful lot about all the buying and selling and what sort of products would work. But I did realize that there were specific things that you could sell that were available now, that you didn't have to do a lot of work about finding a lot of different suppliers or building up new inventory. And that was around things like fruits, fresh fruits, whether you're talking about wild currants, rose hips, it didn't matter, any fresh fruit that you could get, Saskatoon's blueberry, wild blueberries, that you could get into the major